Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. We've recently launched our Patreon page, which can be found at cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon. If you aren't familiar with Patreon, it's an easy way for those who are interested in this show to help out by simply pledging a small amount each month in sponsorship. Now that could be as little as $5 a month, which is about £3.80, or as much as you like. You will enable us to dedicate more time creating more content to help you, including videos, more blog posts, and even more shows. So if you can, head over to cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon and get involved. In this episode, we talked to Ben Slinger about Podchaser, a new podcast platform. Ben is based in Melbourne, Australia, and is a lead developer at Podchaser, and is one half of the podcast Bitstorm. When he's not writing code or hosting podcasts, he spends his time as a father of three. So welcome to The Cynical Developer, Ben.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to come on. And it's a bit of a different one for me. Normally, it's around 8 p.m. that I record in the UK, and then everyone else is earlier on if they're further afield in America and places like that. But it's the other way around today.
Yeah. Well, as you said, with the three kids, I kind of had to pick a time that was after their bedtime, because otherwise you'd end up with screams and fighting in the background. So you probably didn't want that. Oh
yeah, definitely. And being a father of twin boys that are two at the moment, it is a real struggle. I've had to cancel some recordings because they just won't settle and won't go to sleep. Because normally when I record is once they're in bed and they're asleep is normally when I can get the recordings done. But sometimes they just won't let it happen.
Sure. Well, coincidentally enough, I have twin 2-year-old girls.
All right. Okay.
So I feel your pain.
Yeah, yours is a little worse than mine. If you've got 3 all told, though.
Yeah. I have a 4-year-old as well. So
yeah, that must make it a lot harder.
He's pretty good. He goes to sleep in about 3 seconds. The girls take a bit longer.
Right. Yeah, we get that between the two of them. One will drop off straight away at night, and the other one will stay up and mess around, and then the next night it'll be the other way around. So it is frustrating.
They do like to trade off.
Yeah. Anyway, we're not here to talk about the problems of twins. Although it is
that's a different podcast.
Yeah, it's a definite struggle though. We're here to talk about podcasts. So you host your own podcast called Bitstorm. So you tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Funnily enough, just as an aside, because we mentioned it, I actually, when I did start podcasting with my friend Trevor, who is on Bitstorm, we started a parenting podcast called Two Sweary Dads. And Bitstorm kind of came out of that because we realized fairly quickly that we didn't actually have enough to say about parenting every single week. Yep. So we started doing these other little segments, and we started one segment called Click Pitch, which is where we take words from a random word generator and try to come up with game designs based on those words.
Okay.
And so, eventually we got to the point where we realized that was the most fun we were having on our podcast. So we split it off into its own podcast, and Bitstorm was born. That's kind of what that's about. It's sort of an improv comedy game design podcast. We often have guests on, either other podcasters or game devs, like local game developers from the area. We're up to episode 37, so we've been doing that for a little while now.
Right.
Lots of fun.
Yeah. It's interesting. Game development's something I've not really done. It's one of those things that's on that huge list of I need to learn, but I never get around to it. I sort of understand that there's a loop, and that's about it for my game development knowledge.
That's a good start. Yeah, I've dabbled for. I mean, you could say I've dabbled for like 20 years.
Yeah.
Never actually finishing any projects.
Sure.
I'm obviously a programmer in my day job, and with Podchaser. I've attempted game development multiple times over the years. I have a little bit of knowledge around that. But what Bitstorm does for us is it lets us do that really fun part where you're just brainstorming and coming up with ideas without then having to go through the slog of actually sort of getting them down in code and making them work and balancing them and all the little all the little bits that slow you down and sort of really make up that hump of a project.
Yeah. I have subscribed to Bitstorm, but I'm up to 22 podcasts, I think, in my podcast app, and I'm quite a way behind on a lot of the podcasts. Most of them a lot of them have got around 20 episodes to listen to, so I haven't caught up just yet. But it's on my it's on my to-do once I want to do a little bit more commuting, because I'm doing a lot of working from home at the moment, so it's hard to sit and write code and listen to the podcast at the same time, I find.
I know. I'm sometimes jealous of those people who have jobs where you can listen to podcasts at the same time, because you don't sort of have to engage those same parts of your brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find with coding, no, I can do music in the background, but with podcasts, I'm either getting distracted from the code or I'm realizing that I just listened to an entire podcast without hearing a word of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I listen at anywhere from sort of 2.7 times to 3 times speed. And in the car, I can do that, or when I'm out running or exercising or whatever, I can do it.
Yep.
But like you say, when you're sitting writing code, you're actually, your active attention is on the code, not on what's being said.
Yeah.
So it is difficult. And I was commuting sort of about 4 or 5 hours a day every day of the week, and now I commute for maybe an hour and a half twice a week at most. So I've gone from being up to date on every single podcast I listen to falling behind. I do often walk around with headphones on or just my phone playing the podcasts, and the wife gets a little bit annoyed by that. Because it's playing so fast, all she hears is what are you doing? What are you listening to?
Yeah, I find the best time for me is when I'm doing the dishes of an evening.
Yeah.
Or mowing the lawn. Those are the times, because I don't have much of a commute either. I often work from home, and I'm only sort of 15 minutes away from my work anyway.
Right.
So yeah, it's sort of when I'm doing jobs around the house that's my podcasting time. That's when I can actually. Pay attention.
I was speaking to somebody not that long ago, very dedicated to his podcast listening. He actually lives probably a little similar distance as you to where he works, and he actually walks 15 to 20 minutes out of his way, out of the direct route to get to work, so he can listen to more podcasts.
So he can get to the end of the episode.
Yeah, before he gets in. No, that is real dedication.
Absolutely.
And we're here really to talk about Podchaser. Now, it's a new platform. So what is Podchaser?
So it's a new site for podcasts. Our tagline is kind of that we want to be the IMDb of podcasts. And the way it actually started is I was browsing Reddit, the podcasts subreddit, last July 2016. And I came across a post where someone had posted, is there something out there, asking if there was something out there like IMDb for podcasts, and if not, does anyone want to help him make one? And so I replied, because that's sort of, I was looking for a new project. Web development is my day job, but, I don't get to work with a lot of the sort of more recent technologies and that sort of thing. So
yeah, sure.
I was sort of in the market for a project, and we messaged back and forth and found that our vision aligned fairly closely. And so that was Bradley, who is our CEO now. We sort of started it, and we brought in another few people to work on it since then. Ryan, my brother-in-law, actually is the designer, so he's the one responsible for all the prettiness and the UI stuff, which we've had quite a good response from, and then another couple of guys in the US, James and Cole, who are doing sort of the PR and marketing and finance sort of parts, and responsible for helping grow the site and find new opportunities.
Sure.
So that was a long way of not actually telling you what the site is about, but what we've built so far is a new platform for rating and reviewing podcasts, and not just podcasts, but our focus is really on the individual episodes, because we've found almost all, if not all, other sort of aggregators, if you will, or ratings out there. And I mean, iTunes is obviously the big one. Everyone asks you to go rate on iTunes.
Yeah.
It's one single review for the entire podcast. And when you read one of those, you don't really know where someone was up to when they reviewed it. If they've changed their mind since then. A lot of different things, and it's hard to encompass an entire podcast in a single rating or a review like that. So what we've done is, we allow you to also rate and review the specific episodes, and so that lets you, for example, go to a podcast and find the highest rated episode for that podcast, and that might be a good place to start, or look at the episodes that are trending in any particular time, so you can kind of get a better sense of what's going on in the sort of podcast sphere, if you will. So that's kind of the focus there.
Right. So you're very similar to some of the other applications out there, but I think your USP is the fact that you're going to have ratings per episode rather than just for the podcast as a whole. Is that the only difference really for Podchaser?
We obviously have a lot on the roadmap.
Yep.
At the moment, the main focus is on rating and reviewing, but as we said, the IMDb podcast, as it implies, we will be looking at bringing in our people functionality, which is going to give users the option basically the idea is that you want to see everything that a particular person has done in the podcasting universe, sort of thing. So you go to so-and-so's people page and you see, okay, they hosted this podcast from this time to this time. They were a guest on an episode of this podcast, and we'll be adding the ability to follow a particular person, so you might get notifications if they do a guest spot on another episode or start a new podcast, that sort of thing. And again, further down the line, we're hoping to get into the recommendation space, and we'd pull from all of this data things that you've rated highly, things that you've saved to your lists, people that you're following, and give some suggestions on, if you like this person, then you might like this person or these podcasts, or that sort of thing. So discovery is going to be a big part of it, and we're hoping, again, with the sort of episode focus, that will take away some of that aspect of just the big podcasts always being at the top of the list, right? You go to any podcast aggregator and you see the same 10 podcasts up the top all the time. And so we wanted our site to be a bit more dynamic than that. And I think that focusing on the episodes will give us the opportunity to do that a bit more. That front page should always be changing,
Yeah. I think that the likes of iTunes have the noteworthy new podcasts and things. And it's very cutthroat how you get in there. It's a very gamed system. So, and you've only got a limited time to get in there. And if you miss that small window, that's it. You're not getting in there. So promoting the episodes individually, I think, is really good. I like that. And also the having the guests searchable and stuff. That's really nice touch.
Search is going to be another one of our big sort of pillars. We index the title, description of every episode that we have in there, and we also, so one of the other things we're doing, and sort of all this is very iterative. As a developer, and your listeners as likely have some development experience. That these the things go through these iterations and you build on them over time. So. We're working on a tags-based system at the moment. It's fairly simple between just categories and a sort of tag or hashtag style tag, but we're going to branch out of that into smarter tags that have a bit more focus to them and allow you to filter down your lists of podcasts better, search a bit better. You can really find specific things that you're looking for. Already we let you filter on things like average length of episode for a podcast, how often a podcast releases their episode, that sort of thing. Even we're going to add fairly soon, and this is just a fairly basic one as well, but the day of the week that they tend to release an episode. I've seen people on some of these podcast groups and things saying like, I'm looking for someone a podcast to fill in my Tuesday,
sure.
because they one of their other ones has dropped off. People out there who listen to podcasts often listen to a lot of podcasts, and we're hoping to help people manage that and help them find new podcasts.
Yeah. It's so you're definitely a lot more than just a podcast player, which a lot of the other services out there are, and that's really good. I think. It is very early days at the moment for you, with it being new, but there's some really nice potential there.
We think so, yeah. And in fact, you mentioned the player. Like, we do have a basic player on the page, but from the very beginning, we've sort of said, we're not trying to compete with, particularly in the mobile space, with player apps that are already out there.
Sure.
We saw a hole in the market for this sort of directory rating and reviewing community style site. iTunes just wasn't cutting it.
Yep.
For us. But the player space is fairly crowded, and there are some people who are doing some really great work in the player space, in apps and that sort of thing. And we're hoping, and we've reached out to some of them already, and we're hoping that we can work with them so that it makes it really easy to come to Podchaser, find a new podcast, subscribe to it in Pocket Cast or Overcast or Podcast Addict or whatever.
Yep.
We want to work with them and hopefully, create a sort of, I hate to use the word synergy, but synergistic relationship there.
Yeah. So take their very basic search system and replace it with API calls into Podchaser.
Potentially, yeah. We've definitely talked about that sort of thing.
Yeah. So at the moment, it's all web based. There's no mobile applications or anything like that, is there?
Not yet. No. We're a fairly limited development team, and we're all sort of working. We all still have full-time jobs, so we're all working on it in our spare time. So.
Right. Okay.
We're tending to sort of keep the scope relatively limited at this point. We're looking for funding to hopefully let some of us take it on a more full-time basis, and potentially hire on new developers. But at the moment there's just not enough dev time in there to be working on mobile apps. But it's definitely on the sort of future roadmap. We've thought about it. It makes perfect sense, obviously, to have an actual app. We're working in React on the front end, so we're hoping we can leverage React Native there to reuse some of our code and functionality.
Okay, cool. So do I need to pay a subscription fee or anything like that to start using Podchaser?
No, absolutely not. For a while there, we were in closed beta, so you needed a beta key. But just over a week ago, we went to a full open beta. So you can go to podchaser.com right now, and you can start browsing around, looking at podcasts, playing episodes. The only thing you need an account for right now, and it's a free account, is if you want to save a podcast or if you want to leave a rating or a review, then you will need to sign up. But no, otherwise it's completely open now. We've talked about premium features. Sort of the way that we're looking to monetize is still up in the air. But one of the things we are looking at is premium features for podcasters themselves. So in the next couple of months, we're going to be rolling out the ability for a podcaster to claim their podcast page on Podchaser.
Yep.
And that's going to give them the ability to have some control over how they're displayed within Podchaser. So things like setting the categories, because we're sort of branching the category system away from just the standard iTunes set of categories. We just sort of started to do that now. And so, letting podcasters choose which categories they want to be part of. Things like adding their, social media links and any other relevant links to their site. But basically anything, any data that's going to enhance the way we display their site that we can't already get from their RSS feed.
Yeah. Well, that'd be good. I know that there are a few aggregators out there that they have podcast dedicated pages, but they have scraped their data from different locations, and that information is wrong and there's no way to edit it. I've had that with a few of them, and you contact them and get nothing back. So having the ability as a podcast host to go in there and edit and manage that data, that's great. I really like that side of it.
Yeah. So basically, we pull everything we can from the RSS feed, which of course is generally under the podcaster's control anyway. And we don't want to be we've sort of talked about it. We don't want to be overriding that within Podchaser. Like, we think that the RSS feed should still stay that sort of single source of truth for the data that does live there.
True.
But even things like, people use the RSS feeds in different ways. There's the summary field, there's the description field. Some people just put the same thing in each. Some people will put different data in each of them. So even just letting podcasters say, well, I want to use the summary field for what shows up, in a list of my episodes, and I want to use the description field should be appended on the end of that when you view the single episode or something like that. Just giving them some control over basically how we interpret their data, and how it's displayed.
So apart from just using the system on the website, is there any way that as a potential customer or however you want to phrase that I can get involved with Podchaser, provide feedback, anything like that?
Sure, absolutely. Obviously, we respond to all our emails. We're checking that all the time. So you contact at podchaser.com. Or we also have a Slack, like a Podchaser community Slack team going for discussions on feature requests and bug reports and whatever else. So I can't remember exactly what that's called, but if you go to podchaser.com, there's a link in the left-hand menu to get an invite to that.
Yeah, we'll link to all of those in the show notes as well.
Yep, great. Yeah. That's a great place to get in touch with us. And we're always there to discuss anything and talk about where the site's going and respond to feature requests and bug reports. So
awesome. So we're in beta now, open beta. Is there a roadmap set out with a date yet for when this when the release candidate's going to be going out or anything like that, or is it just a suck it and see type situation?
There's no date yet. It really is going to depend on whether we can get some funding. We're hoping we're out there talking to VCs and investors and hoping that we can get some money to sort of build this into what we know it can be.
Yeah.
We see all the potential there too. We've got a roadmap a mile long of things that we'd like to do or like to explore. In the short term, there are things like the podcast claiming and the people features that we're working hard to bring as soon as we can, basically, because we know people are waiting for those.
Yep.
Another thing that I think is going to be useful is just being able to manage your own lists, private lists, public lists of episodes or podcasts. Again, on like the subreddits and that sort of thing, I'm always seeing people saying like, what's the best true crime podcast? What are your favorite history podcasts? What's the best comedy podcast? I think it'd be really useful for people to be able to just link to, hey, here's my list, like the list I've created and curated of my favorite comedy podcast.
Sure.
Try these out. There can be, we're going to let them put a little blurb next to each item in the list and that sort of thing. Order it however they want. That's another feature that's coming fairly soon. Then just we've obviously got a lot after that, but those are kind of the main ones to what you might call the sort of version 1 of the site where we might consider taking it out of beta, and all the bugs, of course. Features.
Yeah, they're not bugs.
It's a feature that you have to click the play button twice on iOS to get the episode to play. Although I blame iOS for that because that's their terrible, stupid needing a user interaction thing.
Yeah.
And we're not even trying to autoplay, but because of I need to track down this bug, but I think it's just because of there's a certain level of abstraction between the user clicking the play button and we're using React and Redux on the front end, so it's firing off actions, going through a saga, putting something into Redux, which then updates React to set the the URL on the HTML audio player.
Yep.
And I guess iOS decides that that's too complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, just interferes with what you want to do, and cross-browser compatibility is a whole minefield for nice things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it'll be in beta for a little bit longer, just so we can get those bugs worked out.
Yeah, sure. It's a good platform. I've enjoyed clicking around and using it. I'm looking forward to being able to manage the actual podcast page itself. And I was tweeting out about the closed beta key that you could use, but now we're in open beta. I would suggest all listeners get out there and give it a go, and maybe jump into the Slack channel and let Ben and the team know all the different bugs that you find, and maybe some features that you want to add in, and get in there early, and be somebody that's shouting from the rooftops about Podchaser, because I think it's going to change the face of the podcasting community quite drastically when it launches, as long as it can get the traction it needs.
We hope so. Yeah, that's a big part of it. Obviously, getting user buy-in, and that's something we're really focusing on. We want to talk to the community. We want to make something that the community wants to use. Obviously, part of that's selfish. The more data we have, the more we can do with it. But again, that data is going towards things like recommendations and hopefully creating a front page of things that are interesting to each person who comes to visit. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, so all the listeners out there, go over, sign up, find the Cynical Developer, review the podcast, and then review every single episode, including this one, on there. Make sure you do that religiously. Please, I'm begging you. I don't beg.
This is it. This is our goal. Our goal is that at the end of every podcast, instead of saying go rate us on iTunes, they say go rate us on Podchaser.
Yep. Maybe I shall change the ending to my episodes to include Podchaser in it. I have recently updated them because they were from when I first started the podcast, and my recording quality has improved since then. Maybe I'll stick in a little shout out for Podchaser as well.
That'd be great. We'd appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem. Well, thanks for coming on and talking to us about Podchaser today. I've enjoyed it. As I say, I like the platform, and I hope some of the listeners come over and start using your platform as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on, and it was a great chat. I had a good time, and yeah, definitely everyone listening out there, come check us out. If you like it, stick around. If you don't like it, tell us why, and maybe we'll change it for you. Yeah. We'll get all the details into the show notes to get hold of Ben, to get into Podchaser and how to get into that Slack channel and everything. We'll put all that in there. So thanks for listening to Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Ben Slinger talking about Podchaser. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website, where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help the Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.